My name is Bob Newton. I'm a special assistant to Father Leahy, the president of Boston College, and the interim director of the Church in the 21st Century Center, and I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's program. The theme this year is Grace and Commitment, and the first issue, the fall issue of C21 Resources, was on the vocations of the laity. This issue, as you probably all know, and if you don't have a copy of this, they're available in the back, is this spring the focus is on the vocations of religious and the ordained. This is our second program and focuses obviously on the diocesan priesthood. We have an event next week which may be of interest to you. A lot of you might know Father Dick Clifford, longtime scripture professor at Weston Jesuit now, and now at the School of Theology and Ministry at Boston College, who will be talking about next Thursday about prophets and apostles' vocations in the scriptures. So I don't want to spend any more of your time. We have a great panel. We have a great moderator. I'm going to introduce him, Father Bob Imbelli. I'm not going to say a lot about him. He's been at Boston College for, well over 25 years. He's been on the steering committee of the Church in the 21st Century Center and is one of the major contributors to all the work we've been able to accomplish over the past 8 years. So let me introduce Father Bob Imbelli.
Thanks to Dr. Newton. I am Robert Imbelli. I've taught theology here at BC for almost 25 years. It seems longer, but it's almost 25 years. In that time, I have often experienced the hospitality of my colleagues and friends in the Jesuit community, even though I'm not a Jesuit, but a diocesan priest. I've also enjoyed the friendship of a good number of priests of the Archdiocese of Boston, even though I myself am a priest of the Archdiocese of New York. You may have picked up a slight trace of accent. And finally, I've been the recipient of a great deal of tolerance from the people of Sacred Heart in Newton Center, where I've resided all these years, even though I'm a stalwart Yankee fan. We are privileged to have a distinguished panel of guests this evening, priests of the Archdiocese of Boston, spanning 3 generations. I won't say which way the span goes, but spanning 3 generations. The sheet that you have introduces them to you. I'd just like to add a personal note. I've known Father Brian Hare for many years. We were active together in the very first stages of the Catholic Common Ground initiative that Cardinal Bernardine launched. And I've always learned from his keen insight and been inspired by his ecclesial commitment. I have the pleasure of coming to know Father Paul O'Brien when he spent a summer with us at Sacred Heart while he was still a seminarian, and once saw even then the commitment and the creativity that is so strikingly apparent in the fine documentary about his ministry in Lawrence, Scenes from a Parish. And though I had not met Father Bill Lohan prior to this evening, I have heard about his own discernment entering the seminary 11 years after he graduated college, and his dedicated work in both prison ministry and the Life Teen ministry. So we have with us this evening 3 priests who bear witness to a rich diversity within the common commitment to priestly ministry in the Archdiocese of Boston. As far as possible, and even we try to set up the room in such a way that we can have a more informal type conversation. And I will, for about 35 minutes, address some themes to the panel. And then after that, open it to your own questions to them. So with that as our format for the evening, the first theme I thought we would strike was asking the panelists, what was the attraction that led you to ministry? What influences guided your own discernment? And I thought it might be appropriate to start to give the older people time to refresh their memory with the youngest. So, Father Lohan.
The attraction to it. I think I'd have to start, my answer won't be in chronological order. I think I would start with a very, very intense and grace-filled confession that I had around age 30. I'd been given very, very good roots in my life and my faith, and Susan Abbott was the DRE in my parish at St. Teresa's where I grew up. She's here tonight. I was given very, very good roots, but there was a period in my life where I got lazy about my faith. I was certainly seen as a good person by the world's standards, the way the world judges, all-around good guy. But I wasn't living for God. And it was the confession that I had with a very elderly friar at Arch Street that was very, very influential in my changing, really my view of what was life about, what was I going to do with it, what was I doing with it. And it was a radical, radical conversion for me. And it was him. It was him. It was that sacrament that really got me to think how good God was. And from there, I took a kind of a reorientation of everything in my life, how I was living, what I was doing. And I knew shortly after that I couldn't continue in the career I was in and that I had to do something else. It was a long process then that I went through in prayer, but a lot of it, I'd have to say, was before the Blessed Sacrament. And then moved by those experiences, then looking back at some of the folks the priests that I had as a youth, they were so dedicated, Monsignor Sheen. Even one of them, and I have to say, one of them that's been was removed from the priesthood, had a very profound effect on my life. Looking back at the love that they gave to us, at the care that they showed to us, that you don't think about when you're little. They're like robots. Nuns are robots when you're little. They're not people. It was only later, then looking back, that I could see the beauty of this self-sacrifice that these folks had made. And I was inspired then, retroactively looking back, but it was the confession.
Thank you. Paul?
So you seem so good. I wasn't so good. I didn't have any attraction to being a priest whatsoever. I had no thought about being a priest. And I grew up here. I went to St. Ignatius, so it was Jesuits by whom I was raised, and I didn't really know what a diocesan priest was. I think I had an impression that they were sort of dim versions of Jesuits. I think. So I had an experience in the first 2 years of college, somewhere in there, of a real knock over the head. One moment, God giving me a hit on the head and a call that I saw and felt and heard in about, it couldn't have been even a minute. So it was just a call from God that I want you to be a priest. And I remember thinking afterwards, that was the most beautiful, powerful, clear, anything I've ever known. And that's ridiculous. I would never want to be a diocesan priest. I would never want to be a priest. I would never want to be a diocesan priest. So just really no attraction other than God's call. And I think that, as you said, looking back, the examples I had of priests, I went to Mount Alvernia Academy up the street, of sisters who were really terrific there. There was one of my aunts was a sister. I had many examples of normal people, as well as the others, who made it credible that being a priest or being a sister was something that you could do in your life and be happy. So, yeah, I think in thinking about shortages of priests, changing numbers of priests, looking for the people who are the most likely, I would never have been the most likely. So God may have choices well beyond the people we're looking at, naturally. The last part of that is my mother, who is back there, was in a group who went to Mass at St. Mary's here in the morning. And there was one elderly Jesuit who would have them pray every day for an increase in vocations to the priesthood. And I think 3 of the people in that small group who went to Mass every morning, their children all became priests. So they never would have been thinking about that. But of all, day after day, these people are praying for this, and 3 of their children became priests. I think the power of petitionary prayer should not be underestimated.
Yeah.
Paul, could I just ask, what led you eventually to the diocesan priesthood?
That call was clear from that first moment. It took place actually at Mass at St. Paul's in Cambridge, though I was not paying attention. And it was, this is what I want you to do, to be one of these priests. And again, I remember walking out of the church and thinking, oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding. But it was from the very first moment, this is a specific vocation.
Wonderful. Now, Father Brian Hare was, amongst the many things he's done, was also pastor of St. Paul's in Cambridge. So I think, Brian, if you'd...
Well, in contrast to my two colleagues, I have no definitive event that did this. I would have to say sort of remote and foundational were the faith of my mother and father. Powerful, powerful faith. Nobody in my family was in religious life. I never went to Catholic schools until I went to college. And so none of that contact was there. And I'd have to say, in all honesty, I entered the seminary out of a sense of duty, sort of Kantian duty. That is to say, church is important in God's plan. Church is important in terms of the life of the world. If you think you might fit into that framework, you need to try that first. And but it was a sort of sense of duty without a great deal of content. I think the definitive impact for me was not an event, but a process. Once I entered St. John's had a fantastic faculty. I entered in 1960, so as you did, so the Vatican Council was the key. And that faculty just steeped you in what was going on in the theological life of the church at that time. And so building on a sense of duty, the next step was the really quite extraordinary theological ferment that preceded Vatican II and then was taking place at Vatican II. So slowly, over time, that took hold of me. And on that basis, what I had originally entered the seminary for was to fulfill a sense of duty, widened out into a sense of vocation, but it was a long process leading right up through to the last year before I was ordained.
Father Hare mentioned Vatican II, and I was presenting it to my undergrads the other day. And as you know, in 2012, it will be the 50th anniversary of Vatican II. And I said, it's impossible for me to get my head around that. It seems just like yesterday. Of course, for you people, it seems like the Battle of Thermopylae or something. So, perspective. Having talked a little bit about the past, let's move to the present. And at least the theme that came to me was, what is it, or how would you talk about what gives you present joy in the priesthood? What is it that you find energizes you? And I guess as a follow-up, has that changed over the years? Maybe not so much for Father Lohan because he hasn't had yet that many years. But Paul, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, so for me, joy is happiness that is directly connected with God, that is so the most profound kind of happiness directly connected with God. A situation can be really difficult and I may not be feeling so good, but I can still experience joy. So as well as when things are going well. So I find the greatest joy in any direct, many different forms of contact with Jesus Christ. In my prayer life, I experience a lot of joy. In celebrating the sacraments, I often experience profound joy. When there's any outbreaking of the kingdom of God, particularly when it seems, when there seems to be a need and it seems unlikely that that need will be addressed, but people of faith put themselves to work and God breaks through them, and something real takes place. Somebody who's hungry is able to eat. Somebody who is depressed really finds peace. Any outbreaking of the kingdom, I really feel joy. The other day I spent a lot of time playing basketball with kids or watching kids play basketball and feeding kids. So there's a boy who is a junior in high school in my community whom I've known since he was in middle school, and I've known him in the context of feeding him and sports. There he is before Mass in church, just spread out on a pew, and we have someone from my parish is here. We try to have a real evangelizing thrust to everything we do in our parish. And the natural question that came to me was, what are you doing here? Which would not have been very appropriate. But I'm thinking, what are you doing in the Catholic Church? And I came up with a better way to phrase that. And he said, he looked down, and I was a very tough kid, and he says, I want to be closer to God, and I want to live a better life. I experienced so much joy in that. That is clearly only God's work. No one made this decision, no one planned this. So just that bursting out of the kingdom, one person, but in the midst of a lot of darkness in an unlikely situation, I really experienced joy in that. And the last part is, I think as ministers of Jesus Christ, when you see his kingdom growing anywhere in the world, again, particularly when it's unlikely, when justice grows, when love somehow conquers hatred, I feel great joy. It may be on the other side of the world because of him. I presume that's a sacramental reality, that we're connected through baptism and through holy orders as his ministers. When others are ministering his grace, there's great joy that I experience.
One of the things, as I mentioned to you just before, that remains with me from our summer together was that Father O'Brien had a real devotion to St. Catherine of Siena. I wonder if you could just say a word about that, because I know some of the younger people perhaps seeing someone like that as a role model. Now, Catherine of Siena lived in the 14th century. What did she say to you, or what does she say to you?
She was super smart. She was very earthy. She was absolutely practical. She was not held back by the cultural expectations or the gender expectations of her time. She was a mystic. She showed that you can have profound union with Jesus Christ, and you don't have to be anything. This is available to anybody. And she, an unlikely person, was an extraordinary reformer of the church in prayer and in action, and continues to be.
Thank you. Bill, you want to pick up?
Sure. Joy. I think it would have to be the one-on-one encounters with people, especially those, and it tends to be often, those who have been away from the church or are on the margins of the church. And I think some of it goes back, it relates in a bit to my experience that I described before. It's very easy for me as a minister to understand where they're at because I was there not that many years ago. And to see them, the way that they listen and the way that they're open to the message of the gospel. Sometimes, say, for instance, in marriage preparation, you may have an opportunity to present the church's teaching on a topic that may be seen as controversial, and you can see it in their eyes that they kind of get it. When you bring it, you explain it in a way maybe that they haven't heard before, and you can see that kind of light go on. You can tell that they're going to rethink this at the very least. I get a great satisfaction from that. I know maybe it's different from joy, but that's what to be able to preach to people at a baptism, the weddings, all of that, particularly the funerals. Guys, the funerals, they listen to you. They listen because they're hurt, and they're looking for an answer. They're grasping for an answer. Weddings and baptism are a little tougher, they're distracted. The funerals, they listen. So really, to make those count, even though we bury a lot of people, and there's only so many ways you can say the same thing about a merciful God that has heaven prepared for us. There's so many ways you can challenge the people to remember that this is principally about praying for this person's soul and hoping that God will be merciful to them and give them that gift, but also realizing that we have to keep living, and we have to go from today forward. So those kind of moments I find to be tremendously fulfilling, and they give me a great joy. Funerals, I think, perhaps above anything, and of course confessions in the Mass give me the greatest joy. It hasn't gotten old yet, and I hope it doesn't.
As I said, the seminary was crucially important because it was so fascinating intellectually to be introduced to theology. I had never had Catholic school education. My college theology had not been good, and so I had low expectations of what theology could be. St. John's opened up, again, in the context of the council, a whole range of opening. Now, my own inclination had always been to study politics. So then the next step was theology was interesting, but could you put it together with the study of politics? And early on at St. John's, people introduced me to John Courtney Murray. And so that answered that question. There was no trouble putting theology together with politics. And then I think the joy part came, I've been extraordinarily fortunate in ministry. I've been given an opportunity in ministry to deal with theology and politics both academically and then in the public policy work of the church. And that's been the guiding framework, and it has never changed. That's been, from the beginning, sort of the kind of work that Murray did, the church's conciliar text on the church in the modern world laid out an agenda for the life of the church, and I was lucky enough to be able to get assignments that allowed me to deal with that. So joy came from trying to make the church as much as a force in the world as possible. The surprise for me that has brought a great deal of joy, surprise was pastoral ministry. I was never sure I really would be drawn to pastoral ministry, right up till 6 months before I was ordained. I knew theology and politics had a hold on me, but I wasn't quite sure that pastoral ministry would. It turned out that while most of my priesthood has not been full-time in pastoral ministry has been a source of enormous joy. I always was attracted to the sort of the moralists who taught at the Roman universities and wrote the textbooks in moral theology, but they heard confessions every day. And the sacrament of reconciliation has been the most concrete, specific, deepest part of ministry for me, even though I understand the Eucharist is the center of things. But I have to tell you that experientially that's the case. And particularly since I came back to Boston this time, one of the responsibilities I have is oversight of the pro-life office. And the Project Rachel program, which is a program of retreat for women who have had abortions, both leading up to the actual day of the retreat and following from it, has been an extraordinary personal spiritual experience as these women work their way through very difficult things. But that was the ministerial part was the surprise for me, in all honesty.
I don't want to embarrass Father Hare, but Father Lohan had mentioned this decisive confession at Arch Street. And a person a couple of years back wrote up in Commonweal a decisive confession she experienced with Father Hare. So when he speaks of the importance of the ministry of reconciliation. Brian, I wonder if I could just ask you to say something about how are you are teaching at the Harvard School of Government, the Kennedy School. Does the fact that you're a priest impact on that?
Well, it's a hard question to answer. One of my mentors in life was Monsignor George Higgins, who worked at the Bishops' Conference for 40 years, and for 20 of those 40, I was also at the Bishops' Conference. And Higgins was the great labor priest, and when I used to talk to him about how he thought about his ministry, he said the most important part of his ministry was a ministry of presence, simply being in the midst of working men and women, the labor movement, etc. For me, the first part of Kennedy School, first part Harvard I've been at Harvard over 20 years now, has been just to go about my work the way everyone else does there, but they know I'm a priest. I'm obviously dressed like a priest. Now, I can give you a counter story that if you give me 1 minute, I'll tell it. We have a thing called shopping days at Harvard, where the first, Paul knows about shopping days, that is to say, it doesn't do your ego any good, because the students come in the first day of class and you start outlining what you're going to teach, and they start getting up and walking out as you speak. I mean, you can be 3 sentences in and they get up and walk out. And the undergraduates all have backpacks. They're in the middle of the aisle. They get up and you're trying to impress them with what you're going to offer them, and people are walking out the back door. But at Kennedy School, they're more polite because they're older. So I had one fellow this year who came up after class, and the course is on the ethics of war, and he said, I'm from Colombia, Latin America. And he said, I deal with the guerrillas for the government. So he said, would your course, do you think, be any help? And I said, well, I don't know. I've actually taught other people who dealt with the guerrillas, and so maybe. So then he talked on a little bit, and then all of a sudden he stopped and looked at me. He said, by the way, are you Jewish? And I said, so you have to do some explaining in this ministry of presence. You have to start with a low baseline. But I do think they, once they understand what it means that you're wearing this suit, there's an opening at times to talk about it. But I think the ministry of presence is sort of the thematic idea, and then you do have a chance to bring together some aspects of intellectual life that wouldn't be there otherwise. A woman from the history department is now doing a PhD on Henri de Lubac in the Harvard history department. She came to see me the other day because she said she doesn't meet a lot of people that have known de Lubac and his work. So you get opportunities above and beyond your daily work.
At Boston College, shopping days extended for a whole week. It's called Drop Ed.
Are they polite?
Oh, yes. The final theme that I wanted to raise before opening it to your own questions is geared more towards the future. If we've dealt a little bit with the past and then the present, what are the challenges that you see facing the ministry of the diocesan priest today, whether in the Archdiocese of Boston or even wider? So, Paul, since you're the middleman, would you start with that?
I'll give you three ideas. One is, I think, the perennial challenge and the active challenge is fidelity. Same thing for married people. You enter into the sacrament of marriage, and that doesn't mean that you are magically or just through the sacrament faithful. It requires choice day by day. So I think it's a challenge for me as a priest, and I presume it's going to be a challenge going into the future. Faithfulness to Christ, faithfulness to prayer, faithfulness to the truth that I'm meant to serve other people, faithfulness to the teaching of the church, I think, is a huge one. Faithfulness to ecclesial communion these days, I think, is a tremendous challenge. It's easier to slip away from all of these things, in my experience, than to be faithful. Of course, it's easier to not be faithful. So, yeah, I think fidelity is a big question and a big challenge. You know, if you're a priest, you don't have a spouse who is, keeping up with you and keeping after you and in this together, in this sacrament together. I think that people still, despite all of the failures of priests, give us more leeway than we deserve and presume that we're mostly very quirky, very strange. And so it's both giving us leeway out of charity and then also saying, stay away, please. So I think it's easier for priests to fall away from faithfulness than active Christian married couples. And obviously the mess of the sexual abuse crisis has everything to do with this reality. So that's one. Number two, I think a challenge moving forward is language. The language spoken by the largest number of active Catholics in this country, the languages, are not spoken by the majority of diocesan priests. So this is just a huge thing. I live in a community that's 80+% Spanish speaking at home, and I'm not fluent in Spanish. I'm fine in Spanish. Maybe I'm not fine, but I'm not. I should be perfectly fluent, and I'm not. Most priests don't even have the Spanish ability that I do. So how we do this, I'm looking at Bishop Kennedy. I presume this is one of the things on your perennial agenda, how we actually allow for the space for people to learn, for priests to learn the language of the people that they're going to serve. We have to somehow get at that, and we're not getting at it. The third and final one I would throw up is, it's not a good expression, I would toss out, is the challenge of priests' relationship with the economically poor. Again, you probably would find more active Catholics or people who are open to Christ in economically poor communities than in economically prosperous communities in this country. And yet the diocesan priesthood, which has been in this country associated with the economically poor traditionally, is drifting far away from the economically poor. We're still doing some of our best work, obviously, in economically poor communities, but I don't think the majority of priests, in my experience today, want to be in those communities. So again, how strange is that, number one, for the priesthood, because it should be, number one, about being with the economically poor if we're even just following the life pattern of Christ. On a deeper level, that people would not be most interested in this, I think, is strange. And so how odd is that the priesthood could drift away from the people who are the most alive in Christ or the most open to life in Christ? This is a very big deal. And I think as particularly urban American inner city life becomes a gang culture, you add to this that, if I grew up in Dorchester in 1930 and became a priest, I'd be very familiar with that culture. Most of us today who become priests don't grow up in gang culture, so there's a lot of work involved in becoming part of the life of most economically poor people in this country.
Thanks. Bill, what would
Sure.
you say?
Related to fidelity, closely tied to it, is perseverance. And I think to build on a couple of things that Father O'Brien said, one thing that's a big challenge for me, and I think for the guys that are preparing to come out, is often, you grow up in a place, a Catholic neighborhood like West Roxbury, your friends go to church, you're culturally very Catholic. And you go from there into St. John's where things are done, the liturgy is done very, very well, very beautifully. But then you leave that and you go out and things are very different in the parish. And I think one critical thing we have to be very, very careful of is we can be shocked when the Lord be with you and there's 115 people and really no amen comes back. Nothing's really coming back. And you realize that most of the people out in front of you, they never come to church, not even on Christmas and Easter. That day in, day out, such a high percentage of doing funerals and weddings like that, spiritually can take its toll on you. And I think the most important thing, and I think it goes back to what Father Paul said earlier about sometimes the least likely people to respond. We can so easily, sometimes we have to blow off a little steam with each other when we're alone. Say, can you believe this? This is so, and we've all been through it. We can't let that discourage us from what we're doing because someone out there is going to hear. Not everybody responded to the Lord's invitation to follow him or to listen. Many walked away, and they'll do it in our time. We can't let it stop us because someone's going to hear something. And most of all, I think, to show them that you care for them, that we care for them. Even if they don't come, even if they don't contribute, we care for them. One of the greatest compliments I think I ever got was at a wedding, a couple that did not invest much in the process. And somebody said to me at the end, Father, you really, came across, you really wanted to be here tonight with them to celebrate this Mass. And, it's probably part of me to be very honest, it didn't. Be very honest, it didn't. But that's what love, that's what we got to love. We got to love even the people that are hard to love. And I think that's it, to see that really as a spiritual action, not just something that you're dragging yourself through because it's your job, I think is key. And I think related also to it is recognizing that the people, you have to get, Cardinal Sean said it so well in that tape that he sent out a couple of weeks ago on Catholics Come Home. The people view the church with a consumer mentality. They come to get a product. It's a spiritual Walmart for them. They want what they want, and they want, sign this, Father. I need this to be a sponsor. And then they go. That's hard, and it takes its toll. But to try to equip the people, to get the people that do come, the small number or small percentage that do come, to recognize that their job is to go out there and energize the people around them in the spheres that they move in. That's what the new evangelization is all about, We have to encourage them. It's not just enough to come and be there and, keep the pew warm for an hour on Sunday. And for so many people, and the older they are, the more that's the mentality, to really, really try to break through that. And I think the teens, I find in our place, the teens do that very well. The teens are not afraid to invite, to bring a friend along. But the people my age and up, we don't do a very good job at that. And so I think that also a big, big challenge. And I think also the living arrangements and the sharing that we're going to have to do as more priests are going to be living together, it looks like in the future, sharing space. There may be multiple pastors living together. We don't know how this is going to work, but that's going to take a little bit of humility on our part, and it's going to take, we have to pray together, and we have to spend time together, because we can be infected by that American independent, I'm going to pull myself up by my bootstraps and I'm going to take care of it myself mentality. We need to break out of it and live together, look out for each other. We're privileged in our place. We have 4 guys in our house, all in our 40s, and it really is it's just beautiful to be able to share the meals together. I think that's very, very important for us to stay healthy.
I think the first challenge is the consequences of the sexual abuse crisis. It was so deep, so widespread, and so profoundly shocking that it's going to take 20 years, I think, to overcome that fundamental loss. Because the loss in the end, I think, if you try to summarize what was lost, there were many things lost. First, in the lives of the victims, for sure. But in terms of the church, what was lost was trust. And I think it was a double dimension of trust. It was ecclesial trust. There was a loss of trust between the people of the church and the ordained ministers of the church, priests and bishops. The second degree of trust was civil trust. The Catholic Church in the United States, I think on the whole, has been looked upon over time as a trustworthy institution. There was a presumption of trust, that you could presume you could trust this institution. We came to be looked upon as a threat to civil life in this society. And so that loss of trust has to be overcome, it seems to me, and that would be the first challenge. The second challenge is evident, I think, in some of the statistical data that is now available of the dynamics of religious life in the United States, and particularly within the Catholic Church. So if you take a combination of the Pew Foundation report on the American religious landscape, and then this huge new book of a colleague of mine at Kennedy School, Bob Putnam, called American Grace, the consequences of these two studies I've read commentaries on the both, and they seem to be the same, and that is the American Catholic Church has lost 30% of its membership in the last 20 years. At the same time, it has still remained as roughly 25% of the American population. So how does that happen? Well, as Paul indicated, it's happened because of immigration. So you now have a double pastoral challenge. On the one hand, I think you simply can't be reconciled to the notion that 30% of the people have walked out the door and we don't do anything about it. If we lose that community, we've lost the next generation of them. And therefore, there is an extraordinary imperative to reach out and reconnect people. Secondly, we have to find ways to minister effectively to the immigrant population, which is, again, close to 30% of the Catholic Church. So that's the second great challenge. And I think the third great challenge is probably not unrelated to the point Paul made about fidelity. It's probably the idea of the priesthood itself. I mean, men going into the priesthood today have mountains to climb that weren't there, even though, as I say, I was drawn by duty. But the notion, the image of the priest is been one of the, I think, one of the casualties of the trust. But that simply means we have to reconstitute it. So it's not a reason to give up on it. It is just one has to face honestly that there just is, I suspect, a quick image of the priest that is very different than used to be, and that has to be overcome by the lives of priests.
I would thank you for coming, and I thank in particular the panelists for their rich discussion.